Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to today's session. My name is Mike Kirkpatrick. We're here to talk about nonprofit licensing today on the Power Platform. I am a principal consultant with Heller Consulting based out of Ontario, Canada. I see we've got folks attending from all across the US and Canada today, which is great. Welcome. Um, at Heller, I lead a combination of strategy and implementation projects. For strategy, this would include everything from technology roadmaps to solution selections. And in terms of implementation, I lean more towards Microsoft Cloud for Nonprofit with a focus on customer insights marketing app, which has a lot of overlap with what we're talking about today. Prior to Heller, I spent 15 years in leadership roles in digital fundraising and marketing at the Canadian Cancer Society. Let me start with a little bit more about Heller. For those of you who are not familiar with us, we've been in the nonprofit technology space since 1996. Heller has very recently become a subsidiary of RKD Group, which is a nonprofit consultancy that focuses on fundraising strategy and execution. But Heller got its start supporting Razor's Edge back in 1996, and it's an official Blackbaud partner. We have over 27 years of experience with nonprofit technology products for hundreds of organizations, guiding teams through strategy and implementation on Blackbaud, Microsoft, and Salesforce technologies. We're also a Microsoft partner, which is part of the reason that we're here today talking about Power Platform. I still have to officially confirm this, but I think we're the only, or at least one of very few Blackbaud partners that's licensed to resell Microsoft licenses. We have a team across the entire US and Canada at Heller, all of whom come from nonprofit or higher ed backgrounds and who have certifications in project management, change management, and all of the technology platforms that we support in our implementations. We're proud to be only serving nonprofit and higher ed advancement teams, and we're a certified B Corporation and consider ourselves to be very values driven in delivering value to our clients. So you're probably here to learn about Power Platform because you're either currently or planning to leverage the platform to extend what you're currently doing with Blackbaud technology, specifically Razor's Edge NXT, which is what our focus will be on today. Maybe you want to automate a process, expand reporting capabilities, or build a unique app experience for your staff. Whether it's Power Apps, Power Automate, or Power BI, if you're tapping into these pieces of the Power Platform, there will be licensing considerations that you need to think about. So we're going to be talking about whether you need to have a license, the licensing options that you have for the different components of Power Platform, and how you go about getting a license. We'll use a few scenarios to talk through how many licenses you might require under each of these scenarios. And finally, we'll wrap up with a Q&A session. And we're joined by Mike Wilson from Microsoft's Business Application team, who's here to help answer your questions. So we'll be sure to leave lots of time for that at the end. While I'm talking, feel free to add your questions to the Q&A and chat, and we'll be happy to get to those at the end of the session. So maybe you're just getting started with one piece of this diagram, but just so that we all have a shared starting point, if you're not familiar with the broader Microsoft Power Platform, it's an ecosystem of connected apps and powerful tools that enable citizen developers to build creative solutions that solve their unique business challenges through intuitive low-code or no-code sets of services. These services help simplify the process of building solutions. And with Power Platform, solutions can be built in days or weeks as opposed to months or years. Microsoft Power Platform is composed of 5 key products: Power Apps, Power Automate, Power BI, Power Virtual Agents, and Power Pages. We're going to focus today on the 3 components highlighted in orange, which is where there are intersections with the connectors for Blackbaud Razor's Edge NXT. All of these tools are supported by underlying technologies, which include, as I've highlighted in blue, data connectors. So connectors enable you to connect apps, data, and devices in the cloud. Consider the connectors as your bridge across the information and commands as they travel between systems. Connectors are used by Power Apps, Power Automate, Flows, and Logic Apps, and there's more than 900 pre-built connectors for Power Platform. Blackbaud has built a series of connectors that we can see here for the various pieces of your Razor's Edge NXT data to be able to use that data in other systems and bring data from other systems in. To access Microsoft's Power Platform, you will need to have a Power Automate or Power App licensing. These are some of the early questions to start asking yourself. Most Microsoft connectors are considered standard if they're connecting to other Microsoft tools and don't require licensing. But when you're looking at using a non-Microsoft connector, in most cases, it's considered a premium connector from a licensing standpoint. And this is where Blackbaud's connectors for Power Platform fall into. If you're looking at something involving Power BI, a pro license would be required if you're trying to publish or consume content into a workspace or do some editing and sharing content with others. So that is if you're looking to extend your Razor's Edge NXT reporting using the data visualization and BI tools that Power BI offers. If you're already using Microsoft at your organization, there is a chance that your subscription may include Power Platform licenses. If so, check your IT team because they may already know whether or not they can be provisioned to you or if they have to extend the licensing that your organization already has. If you need to procure licenses, there are several different options available to you. Most versions of Microsoft 365 already come with free Power Apps licenses. So what does this mean? If you're using Microsoft Office 365, you might already have a free basic license. And you can sometimes check this by going to the little waffle icon in the upper left corner when you're logged into your Microsoft account in a browser to see what apps you have access to. But as I mentioned in the last screen, if you want to use a premium connector such as the Blackbaud connectors with these apps, you may need additional Microsoft licensing. So let's dig a little bit further into each of the three Power Platform tools that can be leveraging those connectors, starting with Power Apps. Power Apps is a service for building and using custom business apps that connect to your data and work across the web and mobile. And this is available in two flavors. There's a premium plan or a per app plan. Power Apps Premium enables each licensed user to build and access unlimited custom apps or websites. Power Apps Premium is at a low entry point of $5 US per month per user. And this is in the context of being a qualified eligible nonprofit, which we'll talk about later. And I'm sure most of you have already gone through this for your organization. But this is 75% discounted off the traditional commercial price. Now, the per app plan enables each licensed user to build and access a single app or website. So if you start to get busy with building multiple apps across your organization, and you've got a user who may be accessing all of those apps, with this version of licensing, you're paying each time they access a different app or website. So that can start to add up, which really shows the value of the premium license where you can suddenly access all of those together with a single license. And if you're looking at using multiple environments, for example, on the Microsoft side to test your apps before they go into a full use state with your staff, then you could technically be accessing those apps in a development environment as well as in your production environment, which is going to double the number of apps or websites that you're connecting to as a user. So again, another benefit to using the premium licensing. The per app plan might be a good option to consider if you have just a few apps or a few users getting started experimenting with Power Apps in a small scale. The eligible nonprofits can get Power Apps for free. This is also worth noting if you're a very small organization for up to 10 seats. So that seat would be your calculation of how many users times how many collective apps that they're accessing. So this discounted price of $250 per user per month is 50% off of the commercial price. So just remember that multiplier factor that this is counted once for each person for each individual app or website that they're accessing under this license. You can work with a licensed reseller like Heller or reference the Power Platform licensing guide. So there's a very extensive guide that goes through all of the breakdowns of how you can calculate licensing and see the different terms and scaling of any limitations on on volume and things like that in the licensing guide that's available from Microsoft. You can also get started on Power Apps quite easily with an available 90-day free trial. So if you're not sure whether it's going to have a fit or you're going to try some things out first before you commit, that free trial could be another great entry point. Now, in order, I mentioned earlier that your organization has to qualify for these nonprofit discounted rates. The organization would validate this in the US with TechSoup. They're the primary partner that Microsoft works with across the US and many other countries in the world for this type of verification process. So moving on to Power Automate, we have an online workflow service that automates actions across hundreds of common apps and services. It's available on a per user plan or a per flow plan. So the per user plan is intended to support the broad adoption of automation culture in an organization. And with this approach, every user in this plan is entitled to use an unlimited number of flows within service limits. The per flow plan provides an organization with the flexibility to license by the number of flows instead of licensing for each individual person. But as with Power Apps, the premium option provides the best value, especially if you are just getting started. Power Automate also has a 90-day free trial if you want to use that either separately or in combination with Power Apps. There is also an add-on option, and Mike could speak to this if there's any questions at the end regarding it, but if you need your flows to run in an unattended manner, you can also get what's called an unattended RPA or robotic process automation add-on for Power Automate, and that's done at a monthly rate as well. So there is a nonprofit discounted rate for that add-on. And with our third tool, Power BI, you're able to create compelling and interactive reports that bring together data from all of your organization systems. Power BI powers the business intelligence for your analytics, tracking your KPIs, donor acquisition rates, retention rates, things like that, building out those dashboards that can extend what you're doing within your NXT account. Power BI Pro is licensed on a per user basis and provides extended data source support so that you can get data not just from Razor's Edge NXT, but other systems you may have as well. Provides data capacity and collaboration capabilities. So while you can download the BI desktop tool and build your own data model, reports, and dashboards, you'll need licenses to publish those dashboards and consume content from a cloud-based workspace where you're going to share this information across the organization. There are several ways to purchase licenses for Power Platform applications. The first being a cloud solution provider, and for the purposes of our session, a Microsoft Cloud Solution or Services Provider is a third-party company that offers Microsoft licenses as a reseller. So Heller is an example of a CSP. You can also go directly. So this option involves buying them directly online. If your organization already has Microsoft licensing, someone in your IT department may be able to access licensing through the M365 Admin Center. If you choose to go with this pay-as-you-go approach, the one caveat is that your organization will need an Azure subscription with a credit card attached to it to handle payment. And if you're a larger enterprise scale organization with an existing Microsoft relationship, you may have channels available to you through the volume licensing channels to secure your licenses. But the first piece of advice, no matter how you choose to go, is always start by contacting your IT team rather than purchasing the licenses yourself. They'll know what the best approach is based on your existing Microsoft arrangements. A little bit about cloud solution providers. CSPs can include hosting providers, managed service providers, independent software vendors, and distributors who basically package up their own solutions that include Microsoft cloud offerings. They can provide licensing of Microsoft software either on its own or alongside other services that they offer, but there's a lot of benefits beyond the sale of licenses that you can get from a CSP. So flexibility and scalability, a CSP can offer this, allowing nonprofits to purchase licenses via a cloud subscription billed on a per user per month pricing model. This provides greater control, scalability, and flexibility for modifying licenses without annual commitments, which means that you can add people for a few months if you have a seasonal increase that requires temporary staffing. Ongoing management support, CSPs can help provide some extra capacity with the support on licensing that you purchase from them. Typically, that CSP or reseller has their own partner support services contract with Microsoft, which Heller does. This allows the CSP to escalate support issues on your behalf with Microsoft. And due to the sometimes complex nature of the licensing, your CSP can help you in determining the correct type and number of licenses based on your needs and help access these at the nonprofit rates. And finally, cost savings. CSP agreements are a little more flexible than an enterprise agreement with shorter contract terms, lower or no penalties for adjustments, and no upfront licensing costs. The general results in savings over the long term for any organization that cannot fully predict its licensing needs. Note that you can buy some of this directly from Microsoft as well and from additional CSPs. In order to take advantage of the nonprofit pricing that we've been discussing, along with other grants available to nonprofits, I mentioned that you'll need to work with TechSoup to do that initial validation process, and they do this across 236 countries and territories. TechSoup also has a number of other benefits to offer. They do provide validation status for other vendors as well if you're looking to buy a number of different technologies and need to have that consistent nonprofit status documentation. They have a training portal that includes great training resources on Microsoft products. They're an authorized CSP that sells Microsoft licenses, and they're focused on the sector, working only with nonprofits and libraries. So a great resource for the nonprofit sector as well. So a good way to understand what kind of licensing requirements you might have is to look at specific scenarios. I pulled together a few directly from the Blackbaud marketplace as examples, which leverage the three applications we've been looking at. So in this first example, we have, it looks like a Power App piece that's coming into the marketplace where we would show household opportunities. So it's something where you're going to be able to find opportunities for a constituent and any spousal relationships that they have. So we'll assume this could be a scenario where maybe a button has been added to RENXT that allows the fundraising staff to find these opportunities for a household. So this is a custom app that's extending the functionality of Razor's Edge NXT. In this scenario, we have 20 total users in the organization that have access to the software. The button access has been controlled so that only the 5 staff that work in the major gift team have access to click on it and use the app. And the Power App has been created and managed by a developer who sits in the development operations team. So in this case, this would represent 6 Power Apps per app licenses or premium licenses, depending on which way you wanted to go. If this was the only app in your organization, maybe the Power Apps per app would be fine because you've got the one person who created and manages the app and 5 users in the major gifts team that are working with this app as well. So that gives you a total of 6 licensing for this. In another scenario where we look at a Power Automate example, so we have a workflow that is listening for a status change of a proposal record to move that into a ready for approval state. So this is initiated by user action. Again, we have that same organization, 20 total users, 3 staff in corporate gifts who are creating these proposals, 1 manager responsible for receiving and approving the request, and we have a Power Automate cloud flow that's been developed by 1 developer in DevOps with some support from another Power user in philanthropy. So in this case, we're talking about a flow that's running, and this is only going to require the 2 Power Automate licenses because it's for those who are publishing the flows. So in this case, it's the developer in DevOps, as well as the collaborator in philanthropy, who would both have co-ownership of the flow in Power Automate to be able to make changes to that flow. But the users who are processing approvals or approving those approval requests are not paying for any licensing for this. They're simply users of the flow. We have another Power Automate example, this time that flags constituents, where emails come into your inbox and you want to know that those are related to constituents in your system. So this is a flow that's running in the background. Again, the 20 users, we would want any user that's getting emails that touches on people that are in your CRM environment to be flagged. So it affects the entire organization. There's Power Automate behind it, managed by a single developer. So very similar to the last one, only that developer who's managing and created the flow would have to be licensed to do that. And the rest of the organization that's simply consuming it, the benefit of the flow is not being licensed. And the last example I've got is for Power BI, but it intersects with Power Automate. So we're looking at a workflow that refreshes NXT data sets for your Power BI reporting. 20 users, all staff should be able to look at the published dashboard, and the cloud flow is created and managed by a developer. So in this case, you've got a Power Automate license to manage that flow availability, and each user that's accessing the Power BI dashboard would need a license. So we have 20 licenses for that one. Just moving through quickly to get us to the Q&A section. As you try to work through your licensing of Power Platform to support your enhancements, we typically recommend a bit of a walk, jog, run approach. Start by asking yourself what you're trying to accomplish, which connectors do you need, and which Power Platform tool supports this goal. Are you just learning, or are you experimenting, piloting with other users, or ready to roll out your solution to the whole organization? But once you've thought this through, you should be able to arrive at how many users you're going to need and create apps, just like with any other licensing decision. If I can leave you with a few takeaways before we move into Q&As, I would say, as with any licensing determination, start by examining your needs. It is complicated, but don't be intimidated, because while there are multiple ways to license each tool, you can start small with those free trials I mentioned and on a per user basis, and work your way up as you scale your applications and automations. And there's many places to go for help, as we discussed. Start with your IT team. They'll know what your relationship is with Microsoft, and consider getting your licenses from a CSP who can provide you with other services to help you extend your NXT environment. As you've heard today, there's many things to consider when you're looking at licensing options to extend Razor's Edge NXT. Heller can sell you licenses, but we can also help you in many other ways, including developing those Power Platform extensions to enhance your NXT environment. We offer strategic services to help with overarching technology and fundraising. And finally, we have a digital practice to assist with extending your tools with digital marketing and fundraising. So I'd like to take the opportunity to thank you for joining us today and for your attention throughout. I want to open the floor up now and invite Mike Olson from the Microsoft team to join us for any questions that you might have, or be that a specific question or a scenario that you want to go through.
Hey, Mike, thanks so much. I appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to this conversation because I feel like, nonprofits, large and small, could all really benefit from Power Platform. So I'm glad to be here. Our Tech for Social Impact team is kind of touching nonprofits, across the globe. So I'll get to some of the questions that I tagged in the Q&A, and please feel free to keep them coming in the chat as well. So an interesting question about how consultants use clients licensing. There's a variety of different methods to this. In my opinion, the benefit of the Power Platform is you're configuring tools built on Microsoft Dataverse, right? So Microsoft Dataverse is Microsoft's relational database that all of these apps and flows are built on. So what I mean by that is the client is going to host in their environment all of those flows and all of those apps, right? So it's best, in my opinion, best practice to be configuring on the client's tenant if you are a consultant external. So that would be my recommendation. As we touched on with TechSoup, yeah, all validation has gone through there. I can send a link in the chat. There's also a website that I'll link you to as well, that pretty much you can go through. It's a simple process, takes less than 10 minutes to get validated on the Microsoft.com/nonprofits page. It's pretty much just your name, your email address, phone number, and pretty much a documentation that you are kind of an eligible 501c3 and you have the requisite status, and they'll get that to you. It's a really easy, low friction process there. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. Does Power Apps include Power BI, Power Automate, and other apps that license for $5? No. So the license for $5 Power Apps Premium is its own application, right? So Power BI and Power Automate are different applications within the Power Platform, right? So the Power Platform is the entire suite of products. Each individual line of of that. So Power Automate is how you're writing those flows that Mike talked about. Power Apps is how I develop those app extensions on top of my Razor's Edge instance. So that license is $5 that just covers apps. For example, Power BI, Power Automate, and apps together is $5 plus 3 plus 3, roughly, right? So it's $10, $11 to get all of those 3 licenses with your nonprofit rate, as long as you're approved through TechSoup. So it's again pretty low cost of entry as well. Another question in the chat: some recommendations on creating sustainable cloud flows with staff turnover and ownership. That's a great question, and I think that kind of goes back to an earlier question, right? So if you're a consultant, you're coming in and you're using your client's license, of course you want the nonprofit itself to host all of those applications and host all of those apps. In that scenario, Jeannie, I would think the best recommendation there is you can use a service account, right? So that service account would need its own license. The intention is not to have a service account be used by multiple people at the same time, right? So a service account usually is tied to somebody specific, but if there's staff turnover and ownership on that, usually the best course of action is that would be hosted by that service account. Now, the other thing too is you can share all of your flows and all of your apps with your team, right? So it's not necessarily built by a named user, and that named user, in the event that they leave and go to another organization, will lose all that content. Another question in the chat there, Carol: what if we don't run an Azure tenant? That is not necessary, right? So an Azure tenant is not necessary to develop in Power Automate, right? So in Power Automate, you're building on Microsoft Dataverse, right? So that's the database on the back end of Power Automate. You don't need an Azure tenant. What Mike was talking about earlier is if you want a pay-as-you-go subscription. So pay-as-you-go means I'm not licensing per user, per head, but I'm actually just licensing across the organization every time I'm developing each individual flow. In that scenario, you need an Azure tenant to be able to have, like, you jump in the taxi and get the meter running, right? That would be that scenario. If you are just building a flow yourself as a named user, you don't necessarily need an Azure tenant to do that. It would be unrelated. Keep them coming. These are great questions. Happy to address them. We have just a couple more minutes. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to help, Carol. I'll send you some links in the chat real quick. So the first link here is the Microsoft.com/nonprofits page, right? You'll see that page, that link there, and there should just be a big old Get Started button there, and that'll kick off that TechSoup process, right? So get started if you don't already have that, and you can give, like I said, just your address and a tax document that proves you're a nonprofit, and we'll do your nonprofit pricing established to you. All right, one more minute. Any last minute questions? Happy to address them.
I think we're on the timer here. Well, thanks everyone for joining us today.
Enjoy your day, everybody.